There is a time in life when the soul gets hurt, not by fate, but by a person who has broken the delicate trust we put in others. They are not visible, they don't bleed, but linger in the invisible rooms of the mind, dictating our thoughts, our fantasies, and the very pace of our lives. It does not denote ignoring the hurt or faking as if it did not occur. Real forgetting is a task of inner alchemy. It takes embracing the shadow within, the portion that holds on to resentment, murmurs accusations, and insists on justice from a world that is not always giving it. There is within every human heart an area both delicate and deep, where experiences of trust and betrayal leave their most lasting imprints. When someone hurts us, through words, through action, through inattention, the hurt often lingers beyond the immediate moment. It finds its place in the depths of consciousness, quietly forming what we see of ourselves and the world about us. To go beyond the pain, first it must be confronted honestly. There is no valor in flight, no advancement in denial. The human mind, complex and sensitive, is not swayed by repression, it is swayed by acknowledgement, by light. To acknowledge the hurt is not an intellectual exercise, it is a working with the self, a meeting with the very aspect of the psyche that resists consciousness. Too often, when we hurt, there is a tendency to withdraw into rationalization or justification. We remind ourselves that the perpetrator was in the wrong, that things went wrong, or that we just ought to forget. But the hurt remains, for the mind and heart have not yet been allowed to confront the reality of their hurt. The initial act of genuine healing is thus an act of bravery, the willingness to reside with the pain, to allow it to be felt in all its completeness without denial. If we can accept the pain, we are not just listing occurrences in the past, we are meeting with a living force in ourselves. That force can appear as anger, sorrow, disappointment, or fear. It can appear in the dreams as shadowy figures or as intrusive thoughts that keep appearing against our will. We are tempted to push such appearances away, to mute them with distraction or self-delusion, but in so doing we merely strengthen the wound, letting it proliferate in secret, fed by evasion. Naming is the antidote. To give the pain its space in the mind is to take from it its potential for covert power. There is a nuance to this process, since the pain felt is seldom attributable solely to the conduct of another. Too often it evokes in us old vulnerabilities, insecurities, and old unfinished business from past experiences. A slight by a friend, a lover, or a peer can bring on memories of childhood rejection, past betrayal, or the disappointed hopes of growing up. In embracing the hurt, one must be able to see these connections. To meet the present pain is also to meet the lineage of pain that has led us to today. It is here in this intersection of past and present that awareness of self becomes more profound and the potential for healing emerges. Meeting the pain also means allowing oneself to fully feel its strength. Whispering, "I feel hurt," and continuing on as if the world keeps spinning is not enough. The mind requires involvement, tears, shaking, silent contemplation. These are not evidences of weakness but of deep strength. They are the discourses of inner life, expressing truths that intellect itself cannot understand. To recognize pain completely is to respect one's own experience, to confirm the truth of the feelings that course through the soul. It is a claim of being, a statement that one's existence and one's suffering counts. But the recognition of suffering is not the goal. It is a threshold, an entrance to greater insight. By giving ourselves the freedom to encounter the pain without avoidance, we light up the contours of our inner landscape. We not only sense what has been done to us, but also how we have reacted, how we have taken in the pain, and how it might unconsciously influence our thinking and behavior. This aware sense of it converts the pain from a passive force to an active teacher, leading us toward awareness, self-warming, and ultimately freedom. In doing so, there is an intense paradox. The very instant we confront the pain without resistance, it starts to lose its hold over us. As a shadow cast in the light, it withers away in secrecy and terror. Acknowledgement, thus, is not yielding but control. It is the beginning of taking back the psyche from the clutch of resentment, bitterness, and buried grief. The one who has the courage to face the wound finds in it a pool of strength, a well of clarity, and an invitation to expand beyond the boundaries created by old hurt. The journey of acknowledgement is not easy or quick. It takes patience, courage, and willingness to meet oneself in the most intimate and at times painful ways. There will be times of questioning, times when the heart yearns to shrink away into forgetfulness or distraction, but the act of acknowledging the pain, of embracing it, labeling it, and sensing it in all its intensity is the first act of freedom, for until the hurt is observed, felt, and metabolized as part of the larger understanding of self, It continues to have the power to affect decisions, warp perception, and extend the moment of suffering. To recognize the pain is to dialogue with the self, to witness one's own life, and to reclaim the life and energy stolen by unhealed hurt. It is a statement of the psyche's strength, a tribute to the human potential for honesty, awareness, and ultimately healing. And in this action, there begins for the first time the real possibility to turn suffering into wisdom, sorrow into strength, and remembrance into something that can light the way ahead. When one is confronted with the pain caused by another, it is natural to direct all attention outward, to focus on the actions of the person who inflicted the wound, to dwell on their motives, and to replay in the mind the injustice that was done. Yet in this outward gaze, the deeper work of the psyche is often neglected. Real understanding and finally the freedom from pain comes not from examination of the outer world, but from an interior exploration of the shadow that lives within us. This shadow, that dark, unrecognized portion of the self, is made up of those desires, grudges, and terrors which we have denied. It is here, in this secret landscape of the psyche, that the seeds of our pain tend to grow, and here that they might be transformed into wisdom and power. The shadow is not simply a storage place for badness. It is a mirror reflecting to us the parts of ourselves that we have not accepted or acknowledged. When we are hurt, when we are angry, jealous, or betrayed, it is frequently not only the behavior of another that we are seeing, but also the reverberations of unhealed aspects in our own life. Maybe there is a fear of abandonment that has been dormant since childhood, or an unconscious premise that we don't deserve to be loved and respected. These unconscious inclinations function as magnets, attracting experience into our lives that confirm them, organizing our relationships in ways that we have barely any realization. To really understand the hurt, one must look not just at the outside act, but at the inner vibration that it evokes. To face the shadow is to recognize that the hurt caused by another person touches parts of ourselves that we have left behind. It is not a self-blame, instead. It is an act of honest and self-awareness. In this encounter, one will observe how vulnerabilities that are personal in nature have been triggered by another's actions. Maybe the pain of betrayal is made more severe because it stirs up a memory of a past disappointment, a cycle that is repeated until we decide to acknowledge it. Recognition of these patterns is crucial, for it is only when we shine light on the shadow that we can ensure that it does not unconsciously drive our reactions, create cycles of hurt, and warp our view of reality. The process of getting to know the shadow demands courage and patience. It demands that we be willing to sit with discomfort and watch, without instant judgment, the feelings that emerge in us. Usually, the mind tries to avoid this confrontation by rationalizing, blaming, or downplaying. But to avoid these feelings is to let the shadow continue to be unintegrated and the hurt unworked out. By identifying and investigating these inner responses, by analyzing the triggers and the underlying beliefs that they express, one starts the process of alchemy within the mind. The raw power of hurt and anger, once seen and witnessed, can then be converted into awareness, into seeing things clearly, and finally into empowerment. This process of inner search also brings to light the deep interdependence of self and other. People who hurt us end up, in a contradictory manner, playing the role of mirrors for our own unconscious. They reflect those parts of our very own psyche that need attention, expansion, integration. Although it is not their job to teach us thus, the encounter allows for intense psychological insight. By looking at how the pain rings in one's inner experience, one can find hidden strengths, unsuspected abilities to feel with others, to be patient, or to ride out difficulty, and greater knowledge about one's boundaries. To work with the shadow is to restore control of one's internal world. When the unrecognized aspects of the self are made conscious, they cease to be able to control thought, feeling, and action from the unconscious corners of the mind. Pain, initially a source of distress, becomes a sage teaching about self-awareness and wisdom. It is a process neither of erasure nor forgetting, but of transformation, where the memory of harm is transformed from a weight to a guide for personal transformation and mastery of the emotions. Finally, the shadow is not to be feared, but accepted. It is the unseen friend of the self, the portion that holds both possibility of darkness and light. By knowing it, by following the path upon which outer pain coincides with inner frailty, one gains a lucidity and an autonomy that are otherwise unattainable. The movement toward inner vision, toward listening to the unconscious with honesty and compassion, enables the individual to respond to life not as a passive victim of circumstance, but as an active agent in the making of one's own psychic fate. In this battle with the shadow, one discovers that the pain inflicted by another, although real and inevitable, no longer have to control the direction of one's inner world. By reflection, self-knowledge, and honest recognition of the unconscious, the pain is not eliminated, but comprehended. And in this realization, the person is complete, incorporating the shadow into awareness, converting suffering into wisdom, and recovering the capacity to act freely and intentionally, unfettered by unconscious reverberations of former hurts. To forget a person who hurt us is not a work of simple forgetting, as if one could delete a word from a page or erase a scratch on the wall. It is a complex process of inner change and alchemical work in the soul. The human brain will not so easily let go of memory because we want it to. It resists, clings, and reenacts its habits. In that resistance is a secret gift, the possibility of watching our own clinging, learning how the soul clings to pain, and turning that pain into wisdom. One has to come to this work with patience, humility, and a deep reverence for the inner life, since the process is not linear and it will not yield to the tyranny of the conscious will alone. When we have been hurt by someone, our first response is to relive the incident in the mind repeatedly. We practice the insult, the betrayal, the painful words, as if by repetition we can change the result. But this only tightens the hold of the memory on our awareness. To free ourselves, one must take the painful task of beholding the wound with detachment, like an unbiased observer. It is here that the initial flashes of inner alchemy are conceived. By seeing the memory independent of rage or grief, we divorce the raw event from the affective overlay attaching it to the self. Through this divorce, we allow transformation. Letting go involves a conversation with the shadow, the repressed, frequently unnoticed elements of the psyche with which reside resentment, envy, and attachment. These elements of the self are deeply enmeshed with the hurt we experience from others. When something painful is done to us, it not only evokes a response to the other, but also a reaction from within, showing us where we are weakest, where our sense of self is fragile, and where our most secret hopes lie. Forgetting is not discounting these realities, but facing them clearly. We need to question, why is this memory sticking around me? What in my own psyche is moved by this pain? Too often, the very thing that hurts us is a reflection of our own unrealized hopes or unexplored wish. Seeing this is not culpability but light. It is the labor of transmuggling outward pain into inward understanding. In this alchemical reaction, one does not destroy the memory or melt it away. One reshapes its meaning. The memory is now a teacher, a signpost to places within one's self that must be grown, reflected upon, or reconciled. Letting go is thus both release, and reclaiming we release the hold of resentment, but reclaim the value the experience has to teach. Each memory, once a cause of torment, becomes an instrument of wisdom slowly. By deliberate involvement, the memory is transformed from being a chain that shackles the soul to a stepping stone that lifts it up. It is important to recognize that this change cannot be hurried. The mind works in cycles that tend to be slow and roundabout. Trying to push forgetting or trying to quash memory altogether only makes it more prominent. One must instead adopt an attitude of patience and soft persistence. Again and again, one goes back to the memory, analyzes it, and lets the conscious mind wrestle with the truths it reveals. This is a psychological alchemy, a conscious and intentional transformation of emotional lead into experiential gold. One starts to realize that the pain or will does not represent the entirety of the self. The memory no longer has its tyrannical force and is instead a story that does the work of increasing consciousness, not reducing it. Practically speaking, this work is done by making space for reflection and contemplation. Solitude, journaling, meditation, or sustained introspection are the soil in which this inner change can take hold. One comes to watch the emotional tide set up by the memory, to recognize habitual patterns, and to react with conscious decision instead of reactive response. The process of releasing is inextricable from the process of self-awareness. In seeing why we cling, we become masters of the memory, and in that mastery we recover the energy that has been wasted on grief, anger, or yearning. Finally, the internal alchemy of forgetting is a brave encounter with self. It is the knowing that the hurt caused by another is not simply outside but echoes deep into the strings of our own psyche. In doing this work, we are not eliminating the past, we are incorporating it so that it can light up the futures. The soul comes out seasoned, strong, and more mature, no longer bound to the responsibility of someone else's actions, but free to seek the full intensity of its own existence. In this remaking, forgetting is not a passive obliteration but an active, intentional making, a victory of consciousness over memory, of self over pain, and of intelligence over the mess of unadmitted pain. Letting go of someone who has hurt us is not easy or instantaneous. The human mind is complicated, filled with recollections, feelings, and unconscious tiny streams that direct our thinking a lot without our awareness. When we are wounded, it is not just the conscious self that is harmed, but also the deeper, unconscious aspects of ourself. These aspects retain the experience, reliving it, questioning it, and integrating it into the story of our lives. It is not forgetting someone who has hurt us to erase them, because memory is an irremovable part of the self. Instead, it is to rewire the significance of the memory to meet up with it without being controlled by its emotional pull. This recoding takes patience, since the psyche is not to be hurried. It occurs at its own speed, to rhythm and cadence that are frequently incomprehensible, subtle, and complex. We need to see that perseverance in the process of release is not a stubborn will, but a confrontation of the evolving nature of our inner world. As a river wears down its path over stone, so the mind gradually loosens its hold on suffering when confronted with aware attention and loving attention. Initially, the memory of the perpetrator is likely to come surging up uncontrollably, as if taunting us for wanting to get on with our lives. Anger, sorrow, and yearning can erupt without warning, frequently at those moments when we are least prepared for them. These outbursts are no indications of failure, but rather indications of the working through process of the wound by the mind. They ask us to stay with ourselves, to bear witness without judgment, and to respect the feelings as authentic expressions of our humanness. It takes persistence in the form of repeatedly going back to the process of conscious release. The mind is not going to let go of its attachments at the first call. Every time resentment or yearning surfaces, we have a chance to exercise awareness. With each repetition, it is a small exercise in bravery, a reminder that our existence is not to be dictated by shadows cast by another. As repetitions are made again and again over time, they take on a new pattern in the psyche wherein the influence of the past over the present begins to wane. As the sculptor removes stone from a round form to reveal it, so too the patient mind uncovers the emotional burden that holds it back. But persistence is not enough. It must be tempered by patience, for the psyche has its own profound rhythms. To try to force forgetting is to fight the natural process of healing. The unconscious will not be defeated by willpower. It finds its way through in dreams, in passing feelings, and in insidious sensations in the body. These are the ways in which the soul communicates, and to ignore them is to continue the hurt. Patience enables us to read this language, to translate it humbly and wisely. It allows the mind to synthesize experience, to discern meaning even in that which first appears nonsensical, and to come out with a heightened perception of self. Thus, patience is not passivity, but disciplined receptivity, a desire to accompany ourselves on the protracted and often non-teleological path of healing. In addition, the process of continual working with memory and feeling shows us a vital reality. To forget a person is not the erasure of experience, but the reframing of relationship with it. The mind becomes skilled at keeping the memory without being held captive by it. The heart becomes skilled at recognizing the wound without organizing itself around it. With every return, every glance, and every deliberate shift in focus, there is an affirmation of the self's continued sovereignty over their own interior. With time, what was once a source of pain becomes a neutral or even teaching presence, a reminder of lessons gleaned, boundaries set, and resilience forged. In the cadence of patience and perseverance, there is a deepening but subtle shift. Anger mellows, sorrow has room to breathe, and desire loses its desperation. The mind starts feeling freedom not as a lightning release, but as slow realization through the mist. It is a sacred process, as it is through this that the person uses up the capability of self-mastery and self-transcendence. It shows that the human spirit is not fated to be a passive consumer of hurt, but that it may work with its own pain in order to create wisdom, courage, and equanimity. Therefore, forgetting someone who has injured us is an act of deep interior work. It is a practice of patience, a vow of persistence, and an ongoing exercise in awareness. The path is not linear or simple, but is marked by setbacks, reminders, and despair. And yet, in returning again and again to the task of letting go, we build a resilience both delicate and implacable. Gradually, irresistibly, the mind comes to be able to grasp the past in its hand without being controlled by it. The soul, once weighed down, starts to ascend, bearing with it not the heavy burden of resentment, but the radiance of understanding and the peace born of inner coherence. There is a great truth in this patient persistence. Healing is never passive. It is an active discipline with the self, a conscious decision to engage, to transform, and finally to let go. And in this release, the person finds not void but the fullness of life, unfettered by the shadows of another, led instead by the radiant path of self-awareness and inner liberty. Amidst pain, it is all too easy for the human soul to crave distraction in the external world, to cling to activity, clamor, or companionship as if this could obliterate the knowledge of the pain. But the real work of healing is not in the distractions of the outside world, but in cultivating the inner life. Our inner life is a rich soil, an unseen landscape where the psyche can meet its shadows, feed its imagination, and regain the energy that has been dispersed by mourning. To nurture this inner life is to create a sanctuary within oneself, a space where the soul may breathe freely without the weight of external judgment or intrusion. Solitude is often feared, as if being alone with one's thoughts is a form of punishment, and yet it is in solitude that the deepest encounters with the self occur. The mind needs moments of stillness to process its experiences, to spin meaning from the strands of memory and feeling. In solitude, one can encounter the more shadowy corners of the self, the bitterness, the resentment, the fear, and the sorrow that remain after betrayal. These, when encountered knowingly, lose their ability to drive us unconsciously. They are no longer others hiding in the wings, but recognized aspects of the self that can be absorbed into a fuller, stronger identity. The development of the inner life is not a passive condition of contemplation, but an active participation in the forces that fashion the psyche. Art, literature, music, and nature are not ephemeral amusements, but essential tools of psychic sustenance. They act as mirrors and channels, reflecting something of the inner life that otherwise lies concealed. A painting can illuminate emotions too deep for words. A work of music can bring layers of feeling to the surface that the conscious mind cannot define. And the rhythms of the earth can offer a grounding stability when the soul is lost. Through these channels, the mind begins to see, understand, and finally convert the lingering pain into a source of wisdom and creative power. In cultivating the inner life, one also learns the gentle but profound skill of self-compassion. To tend the inner world is to accept the truth of one's pain without condemnation or judgment. It is to understand that hurt caused by someone is not a reflection of failure, but a situation that challenges the inner strength, endurance, and potential for growth of the person. Self-compassion enables the mind to pass through pain without getting trapped in it, to witness the pain without letting it become the essence of one's existence. This inner goodness is the basis of freedom, since on it the mind is able to recover and rebuild its balance. Cultivating the inner life is intertwined with the effortful use of one's imagination. Fantasies, dreams, and the quiet currents of thought are not the product of chance. They are messages from deeper levels of the psyche. To listen closely to these internal cues is to engage in a conversation with the self, to see how unresolved experience and unadmitted emotion reach out to be expressed. This is both a way of comprehending the psyche and a process of healing. By paying attention to these interior messages, the self can start to restructure the psychic contents in a manner that loosens the hold of resentment and pain, enabling the self to proceed with focus and purpose. It is also important to acknowledge that the inner life thrives through the conscious creation, the process of creation, be it writing, painting, sculpting, or whatever form of personal expression, is a negotiation with the unconscious spaces of the psyche. Creation brings the unconscious into relationship with consciousness, and raw materials of emotion and memory are given shape in the form of something coherent, meaningful, and lasting. Creation is, in short, a transition from the injured self to the free self, an exhibition of human potential to transform suffering into beauty, disorder into order, and memory into knowledge. Lastly, the interior life needs to be constantly cared for with patience and awareness. It is not a one-time achieved state, but a practice kept up throughout a lifetime. As a garden, it needs daily attention, thought, and nurturing. Abandoning it to itself allows weeds of resentment, envy, and fear to overwhelm the ground, whereas thoughtful cultivation allows for the blooming of awareness, peace, and resilience. Through it, the self becomes not a helpless victim of circumstance, but an active gardener of its own inner life. The development of the inner life does not make the past disappear, nor does it negate the memory of the pain. Instead, it converts the energy trapped in that memory into a force for resilience, growth, and creativity. To care for the inner life is thus to reclaim the sovereignty of the self. It is to look inward with courage, curiosity, and tenderness, knowing that the greatest freedom lies not in outside forgiveness, but in conscious evolution of the soul. By listening to this interior life, the self learns to ride the waves of memory and feeling with dignity, to transmute pain into wisdom, and to live with a deep sense of self-mastery and inner liberty. Healing is never a passive process. It does not come like a door-to-door visitor, nor is it born of wishful thinking or mere denial of what happened that led to your anguish. In order to really forget the person who has wronged you, one has to walk fearlessly into the active process of change. This book demands that you look inward with courage, knowing that although others have inflicted the wound, it is you who possess the key to your freedom. The mind and soul are not just warehouses of memory, they're living, breathing, and can perform alchemy. And it is by conscious, deliberate action that this alchemy is performed. To go on, one must first take back control of one's energy. Resentment, anger, and the desire for revenge are like ethereal chains that bind you to the past. Every thought that broods about the person who wounded you is a strand spinning a net that ensnares your spirit, binding you to suffering. But this is not a reflection of weakness. It is the natural tendency of the psyche to cling to what is familiar, even when it is poisonous. To break free, one must intentionally redirect that energy. Do not allow the shadow of another to dictate your choices or your sense of worth. Instead, gather your awareness, your creativity, and your attention and choose to invest them where they may flourish. This act of redirection is not an act of denial, but of conscious engagement with life. Begin by identifying what truly nourishes your inner self. Seek experiences that awaken your curiosity, that invite contemplation, and that foster genuine connection with others and with yourself. Engage in creation, whether through art, writing work, or the pursuit of knowledge. Each deliberate act of creation is a declaration that your life is yours to shape, that the past, though influential, need not dominate your present. As long as the mind is filled with purposeful endeavor, as long as the heart is aligned with life in all its complexity, the whole of memory grows weaker, not because it has been pushed into nothingness, but because it has been incorporated into a wider vision of life. Patience is essential in this process. Change comes not in a moment or even a season. There will be days when memories suddenly arise, when the anguish is raw and all-consuming. Don't fight these moments, but don't give in to them either. Be a witness to them, to your own life inside. Every encounter with memory is a time to exercise control over the self, to see that your selfhood does not reside in what has happened to you, but in the decisions you make consciously in response. Again and again, repeated over a lifetime, this practice remakes the mind, dissolving the grip of past events and building the resilience of the present. It is also important to develop a sense of purpose that extends beyond the pain. The soul is great, and its loneliness cannot be captured by one hurt, one betrayal. Seek out work, relationships, or passions that summon you with urgency, that require the complete expenditure of your attention and energy. When your purpose is infused into life, the energy that was once spent on obsession with the one who hurt you is redirected to a power that moves you forward. Thus, the memory of hurting itself is converted to a means of growth, a mentor that moves you towards increased self-knowledge and strength. Still, this journey is not totally alone. Find friends who share your dedication to life and development. People can create deep potential for healing simply because they reflect back the vitality and richness that are still within you, even in the midst of trauma. The presence, understanding, and laughter of those who care remind the mind of its value and the possibilities that await it. Within their company, the chains of anger erode even more, and the past no longer holds the sway it once did. Finally, forgetting someone who has wronged you is a sovereign act. It is the deliberate pronouncement that your life is yours, that your spirit will not be held hostage to the hurtful actions of another. This sovereignty takes courage, discipline, and continuous focus, but it can be achieved. Each conscious decision to put your energy into creation, learning, love, and purpose is an act of freedom. It is in these actions, practiced and built upon over time, that freedom is found, not as a theoretical concept, but as a lived experience. So use this moment as your call to action. Start today to take your energy back, to place it on things that feed and uplift you. Let pain memories be a door to insight, not to imprisonment. Live fully with imagination and with the relationships that nourish your soul. In this way, you will not just lose someone who hurt you, you will emerge transformed, wiser, and unfettered, bearing with you the deep truth that pain, once met with courage and intention, is a journey to your own awakening.